Okay. Right. Good evening, members. I'm Councillor Alan Bartlett, the Chairman of the Corporate Services Policy Advisory Committee, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this meeting of the committee. The meeting will be broadcast live and recorded for playback on the Council's YouTube channel. Will anybody else be recording the proceedings? No, I only ask this so people at the meeting will know this is happening. If the fire alarm sounds during the meeting, please remain seated and members of the Democratic Services team will assess the situation and give further instructions on the evacuation of the building as necessary. Right, we'll move on to item 1, apologies. I've got apologies from Councillor Hinder. Are there any other apologies? No, I know he's not a member on the committee, but had apologies from Councillor Perry, the Cabinet member. Who would be here but is unavailable tonight. So item 2, substitute members. Are there any substitute members? No. Item 3, urgent items. I don't have any urgent items. So item 4, notification of visiting members. Are there any visiting members? Can't see any. No. Item 5, disclosures by members and officers. Are there any disclosures? No. Okay. Item 6, disclosure of lobbying. Are there any disclosures of lobbying? No. Okay. Item 7, to consider whether any items should be taken in private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information. I'd like to move that all items be taken in public. Is that agreed? Agreed. Excellent. We move on to item 8, minutes of the meeting held on 11th of October 2003. I'd like to ask if there are any comments on the accuracy of the meeting, and I would like to remind members that we're specifically on the accuracy of the meeting and not on any other issues that may arise. Councillor Harper.
Thank you, Chair. If you go to minute 53 and the second bullet point on the second line of that, or that sentence is an update on the biodiversity and climate change action plan would be presented to the committee at its next meeting. Well, this is the next meeting. So the minutes aren't accurate, are they?
Yeah, Councillor Cook is right. That's we can bring that up on the next item, but here.
Okay, I'll wait until then.
Okay. So are there any other comments on the accuracy of these minutes? No. Okay, so I move that the minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of October 2003 be approved as a correct record and signed. Is that agreed? Excellent. Item 9, forward plan relating to the committee's terms of reference. Are there any comments on the forward plan? Or yes, Councillor Harper.
Right, I won't refer back to the minutes, except to say, as you're aware, we've been very concerned over the last 6 months, probably, about the Council's biodiversity and climate change action plan. We've been clearly in our last meeting was cancelled, but the one before that we've had the minutes where we were told we were going to receive the report to the next meeting. Now, we have, all members of the committee did get the update note, which obviously the leader had, because at the last council meeting, you know, he was mentioning things which were clearly in the briefing note. But, you know, I'm not sure it's really good enough. I mean, you know, we have been clearly asking for a proper update on it, and the minutes said it was going to be available at the next meeting, which is now tonight. It's not available tonight, and I noticed at it looks like we're anticipating something coming up. What to our February committee now? or because on the action plan, it refers to the biodiversity and climate action plan update going to the cabinet on the 7th of February. So actually, presumably that means it will come to us on the 5th of February, which will be well over 6 months since the committee asked for an update. And at our September meeting, there were 2 proposals in the budget papers we had, Len, the early budget papers, which had growth items, and we refused to endorse them because they were linked to the biodiversity and climate action plan, and we weren't happy back then with the action plan. And so we're going to have to wait now clearly until we get to the 6th of February, when we'll be considering the budget and the action plan, and whether we as a policy advisory committee, presumably if those 2 items of growth reappear, wish to endorse it on them. I just think I think it's quite sad, because I know David and the cabinet, and I think every member of this council is really committed to tackling the issues of biodiversity and climate change. But 2030 is rapidly approaching. It'll be, by the time we meet to discuss it next, it will be under 6 years to go. And then by the time it works its way through to the cabinet, and then any further changes as a result of what we may have suggested at our February meeting comes, we'll be, heading down to sort of 4 years to go to actually make any difference. Now, the items in the briefing note we had, there are some useful things in it. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think, looking at what I saw in that, if that's what we're going to get in February, we're not going to be achieving climate neutrality as a local authority by 2030, or as a borough by 2030. And we're not going to get a chance to properly discuss it at the rate we're going until 2030, because the pace of decision making on this, perhaps only 2 or 3 years ago, was much quicker. So anyway, I've made my point. The other question I've got in terms of our forward plan is around the Archbishop's Palace. We've got Mark here tonight, because I remember, and I can't remember which meeting of this policy advisory committee, when we agreed we'd go out to effectively to a tender process to see what the market interest was. Presumably that needs to come back through the decision-making process, and I just wondered what the time scales were of that, so that it can be added into the forward-going action plan, especially when we look at the budget paper, or the financial papers later tonight, showing that we've now got an unexpected cost from a palace coming through.
Thank you, Councillor Harper. Okay, would you like to answer that, Mark, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I don't think it's made it onto the forward plan that you've got in front of you this evening, but there will be an item on the Archbishop's Palace coming to the committee in January.
I've got Councillor Thompson, then I'll come to you, Councillor Gooch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councillor Harper may not wish to pursue the point about the Biodiversity and Climate Change Action Plan, but I very much would like to do so. I would refer to, in his absence, and Councillor Webb will excuse me in his absence for referring particularly to his comments. The history, as you will remember, is that it was alleged that the Biodiversity and Climate Change Action Plan that we had before us was not smart. I note from the briefing note that we've now received that CEUK clearly did think that it was specific. They clearly did, for example, by referring to targeting MBC operations to reduce by 55% Scope 1 and 2 emissions that it's measurable. The question of attainability, of course, relates to the will of council members and engaged residents. So that's a matter beyond the council's direct control in terms of residents, but not in terms of the actions of members. Is it relevant? Well, if it's now judged as being 35th out of 186 councils in terms of its aspirations, including housing, transport and environmental improvements, that would clearly indicate that it is relevant. Is it time related? Well, CE UK endorsed that the plans for tree planting in 2024, the survey due in January 24, the depot upgrades, which I've been privileged to see firsthand myself, the bids that have been put in, the increasing numbers of people engaged in the Eco Hub and so forth would seem to show that our plan is time related. Indeed, I note in the action plan that the last bid was put in within 4 minutes of the window opening. So clearly we are capable of acting in a specific, measurable, attainable, relevant and time related manner. But I am none the wiser as to whether Councillor Webb or colleagues, Councillor Cannon, I believe, also endorsed his reservations without giving any specific reasons why. We do not know, either now or in response to emails, as to what their opinions about these things might be. Whereas I do note in this document, I think it's page 54, that the risk register shows the relevant factors in this report to all be shown in red as being urgent and not being met. So in sum, Mr. Chairman, I'm grateful to Councillor Harper for his assistance in the formalities today. Not only did we ask repeatedly for updating to the processing in terms of the Biodiversity and Climate Change Action Plan, but also in terms of engagement from members, representatives of the council, and I'm grateful to see the leader here this evening and hope that perhaps he can shed some light on some of these matters. Finally, to notice, as Councillor Harper mentioned, the two areas of growth in the budget that Councillor Webb and others specifically withheld their approval of are not mentioned in the update in any way, shape or form, which alarms me considerably. What therefore is the status of those posts, those planned posts in the current area? I look forward to hearing from officers and members as to what that might be. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Did you want to come in on that, Councillor Burton?
Yeah, very simply, the Climate Change Biodiversity Action Plan says there will be 2 reports back each year as to progress. And on the second of those, it's an opportunity to update the plan itself. That will occur, that will happen. I think you're abusing the forward plan item to try and discuss the item. And I sympathise with you because this is a policy advisory committee. You have no roaming remit. You're not able to request those reports and make those asks. And I speak that out because there's an opportunity to reconsider how the Constitution works. But meanwhile, your only recourse is through overview and scrutiny, which I would urge you to seize if you want to delve into the issue as a sense the hunger exists, or change the Constitution and bring those powers to this committee. But the commitment to the updates will be kept.
Thank you, Councillor Burton. Councillor Gooch.
Thank you, Chairman. Darn it, the leader has stolen my thunder. Because I was going to say that as much as I support my colleagues on this side of the chamber with the comments that they have made, it's actually a waste of time because the Constitution does not allow this policy advisory committee to request reports, to ask the questions, to challenge, to probe. That's the role of scrutiny. So I would like to just beg everybody to look at the change of governance to enable the PACs to become POACs, which is to change the Policy Advisory Committee to Policy Advisory Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Wrap it all up in each of the areas, whether it's 3 areas or 4 areas. We had this conversation at a governance workshop, I recall, and lo and behold, here is the wonderful illustration that backs up that argument. So we sit here talking about something over which we have no control over the current governance. So thank you, Chairman. I look forward to the promised updates. I formally thank the officer for the comprehensive update that he very promptly provided. I think he detected that we were getting a bit itchy over it, but whoever requested it, I'm glad we got it. Thank you. But I think we've got to stop knocking the system, because that's a system we're stuck with at the moment. Hey ho. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Goode. Are there any other comments on the forward plan? Again, on the forward plan and strictly that, no. So, oh,
On page 10, funnily enough, it is the biodiversity and climate action plan update. I take it the lead member will be the leader, or have I been looking on the wrong page? There's a gap as to where the lead member is, so I assume it's the leader. I'm sure it is, but
I've just been informed that that is correct. It will be the leader, and the Democratic Services team are going to correct that for you. Thank you. Well, thank you. So, yes. So I'd like to move that this forward plan be noted. Is that agreed, members? Agreed. Lovely. Thank you. Now, before we move on to the next item, Councillor Cannon is now with us. So, can I just ask, are there any disclosures or disclosure of lobbying, please, Councillor?
Thank you, Chairman. No.
Okay, lovely.
Sorry for my lateness.
No problem. Thank you. Right, so now we can move on to item 10, the second quarter finance reporting, finance and risk monitoring reports. I'd like to call on Councillor Burton, the leader of the council, to introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. Chairman already recorded the Cabinet Member for Corporate Services apologies this evening. You may all be aware he's had some surgery recently and is convalescing. But knowing him, he will be tuned in and following every word that is said here. So good evening, John. And consequently, you have a second best, as I am operating as his understudy. The report in front of you, I think, is well written and pretty self-explanatory. I think that, you know, apart from picking up red flags, this is really useful this time of year as we're heading towards that budget making process. You know, is flagging up the areas that we probably all know, but it's good to remind ourselves where the concerns are, where we need to start thinking about future budget making. Overall, the council, we're probably looking at an overspend. A lot of it is driven by the temporary accommodation risk, which I think we're all aware of, but I'm going to keep saying it because it's a big one that we just mustn't lose sight of. It does appear that demand is softening a little bit, but my gut says it's a lull before a storm. This portfolio has done quite well, partly because of there's some capital projects that haven't paid out yet, so we're not borrowing that money, but actually what money we have got is sitting in the bank, and that's doing a bit better than we thought it might have done. So that does help things out. The performance report, well, the indicators are all there. Business rates have met target. Council tax only narrowly missed its target. Corporate risk register, largely consistent with what we looked at last time around. You are asked to make a recommendation about the issue of business rates write-off. There's a list in the Appendix 6 on page 68. We welcome your endorsement or otherwise of that part of decision making. But please, you know, do note the report and you know, any comments, that observations that you might have. I'm the eyes and ears of Cabinet tonight. Very happy to hear that and take it back.
Thank you, Councillor Burton. Councillor Gooch.
Do I beat you to it?
Go on, Pete.
Yeah. Look, I'm really sorry to keep saying the same thing and to sound boring, but the fact is that the whole raft of information in this report is extremely well set out, and it's very clear. And try as I might to try and find a hole in it somewhere, or to think, they've forgotten this. Actually, it is covered. And I fully support the report that's here, and I really struggle to find any improvements or additional recommendations. What it does make me think is, hell, now how are we going to manage the following years? Because we're almost needing to think, well, we're stopping the boat from rocking at the moment, but what about the following years? Where else could we make reductions, can I say, in future? And that's the challenge that I'm finding difficult. But so far as this report at this stage is concerned, it's darn good. I have no further comment to make at all. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Gooch. Councillor Harper, you are next, and then I've got Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a number of questions. So perhaps if I go through sort of in batches, and then either David or Mark can answer. And it's all it all starts after on the variances. So if we turn to sort of page 26, we've got the Archbishop's Palace, which is showing obviously a projected £90,000 variance to the year end. But you referred, obviously, we're getting a report in January. So I suspect we might as well leave the Archbishop's Palace in terms of what's going on there until we see the report in January. It'll probably give us a better basis to go on. It's really more on 28 and 29 in terms of quarter two. The two biggies, aren't they? There's the one, as David referred to, about temporary housing accommodation, and it was interesting to hear what you said, David. Is you think that at the moment we may be almost plateauing, that in terms of the year-end forecast, we wouldn't necessarily expect to see that £780,000 overspend. You say it quick enough, it doesn't sound quite so bad. Not going, continuing to ratchet up, because I think that would be my concern, is that it might be 780 now, but if it's only heading in one direction, it could be forecasting a higher figure by year end, which have a big detrimental effects on us. So I'd just be interested to understand a bit more about how do we think that's going to pan out. And the other thing on the next page is Lock Meadow. Clearly, we've got some issues. We all know we've got a number of vacant, untenanted properties there. And I suppose I'm concerned that we're looking at just over £250,000 shortfall in income. And I'm wondering, picking up Faye's point, as to are we factoring in this type of vacancies into next year's budget and the budget in the year beyond? Because my concern with Lock Meadow is we had it with the market, and the market every year we've had to reduce the income budget there because we failed to achieve the budget every year for about 4 or 5 years. And my concern is if we're starting to get vacancies at Lock Meadow at this stage, I would imagine it's likely to impact into the next year's budget process, and I don't know whether we're allowed for that. So if I stop there, and there's some stuff on capital later.
If I could start and perhaps refer to Mark as well.
Thank you.
Archbishop's Palace, I think we have to give ourselves a very stark warning there. It's a very old, very restricted building with massive overhead to maintain. And we were very fortunate to have KCC occupying it for as long as they did. taking the business rate costs and some maintenance costs. We'd all hoped that there might have been a rather splendid proposal, but skilled as that individual is in coming up with schemes, their conclusion was, I can't make the sums add up. So I want to not set expectation low, but set expectation realistically. We have a duty towards that building, but I can tell you that every effort to find, a break-even usage, a profitable usage, of course, a break-even usage would be good, or something that substantially contributes to the costs is being worked on, and there is a report to come. Councillor Harper, you've reiterated the housing concerns, the temporary accommodation concerns. Let's take a moment to recognise our interventions. We've been buying properties of our own to use. That's a very cost-effective way of dealing with it. We've accelerated that process, bringing that forward a little bit. It's probably one of the better moments to be purchasing street properties, and we'll make maximum use of that. So that's sort of keeping it in check. But I do think we should have a very close eye on that demand outstripping our interventions. Lockmeadow, let's be realistic, that we're in a very commercial world there. There is a very good business plan that sits behind what we're doing. There are some conservative assumptions, but perhaps at that point I'd maybe just pass over to Mark, who might have more specific numbers to help you with.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. To a certain extent, the issues this year with Lockmeadow were anticipated, because we knew that the leases with three of the tenants, David Lloyd, Feathers and Frankie and Benny's, were going to expire this year. And that was anticipated in the business case for the original acquisition of Lockmeadow. And we have been proactive in addressing those vacancies. So, as you know, we have put Serco into the old David Lloyd unit, and they're now operating it as the Lockmeadow Health Club, and that's proving really successful. We're at heads of terms stage with the former Frankie and Benny's unit, so are hopeful of getting tenants in there shortly. And we're also actively marketing the Feathers unit. And also, I'd point out, and I'm sure you've seen if you've been to Lockmeadow recently, we also have got VR World offer a virtual reality experience, move into one of the units that have been vacant for a long time there. So that's been successful. As the leader says, we're operating in a commercial environment there, but we're well geared up to attract tenants, having appointed letting agents, and I'm hopeful that the problem won't actually persist. You said, well, what does it mean for next year? I'm hopeful that for next year we will see the centre fully tenanted.
Thank you. I'll do the other questions just in. I was looking on page 34 where we're starting to talk about capital, and obviously we're talking about the 1,000 affordable homes and purchasing housing in the the private sector, but it refers to slippage in the Maidstone East development and also Heather House. I just wondered, perhaps if it's possible when we get, after I ask the questions, if we've got any more information about those slippages, because they're both fairly important schemes. And also, in terms of the 1,000 affordable homes, looking at what we've got in reserves on page 36, we've got £3,216,000 in the Housing Investment Fund, and that's the fund, the subsidy fund, isn't it, where we're trying to build up. And originally we talked about needing £50 million ultimately, which was £50,000 per house. But I think the figures have potentially gone up more like £65,000 a house, which would mean we need to, over a period of time, build that fund up to £65 billion, which is a massive figure to start to look at. And I was hoping that when we see the budget reports in the next sort of cycle, and there'll be perhaps we could see a reference from the director as to how we're going to, try to get that investment fund up. So that's at the point where we have to have a housing revenue account. There's enough money in it to enable the housing to actually be affordable because we put in the relevant subsidy. And the last two questions are actually on the performance indicators. So on page 45, where the two explanations, we've got the one on economic development, which is the footfall in the town centre. And clearly, when you look at the figures, we're almost 2 million down on the target. And I'm just wondering if one of the factors driving the sort of shortfall in terms of people is the fact that Kent County Council now, in terms of its offices, they're predominantly closed. And most Kent County Council staff are working from home, not many people in the town centre, and therefore that in itself would take out a large footfall, especially if you think of lunch times and early evenings. If you've suddenly lost 2,000 or 3,000 employees from the town centre, clearly your footfall is going to be down on a daily basis by, by potentially thousands of people. So I'd be interested to know if that is one of the factors on that. And then on the market hall occupancy percentage, where we're saying in the text, it says the last sentence, additionally, even our reliable auctioneer takes 1 to 2 weeks off during August. Well, my question there is if we know in August we're always going to be below a standard forecast, so if you just have your forecast projected by 12, shouldn't we do some phasing so that we don't suddenly see this massive discrepancy, which is caused by an event which occurs every year because of the person who actually runs the market hall's on holiday for 2 weeks. So, yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Councillor Bird.
Again, I'll pick up some of that and Mark can fill some gaps and add to it. The housing delivery, our 1,000 houses, the housing investment fund that needs to sit alongside that, first of all. You've heard me speak previously. Delivering those houses is far more difficult than I'd ever imagined it would be. That does not mean that the determination doesn't grow in line with the recognition of that difficulty, but it's tough, and viability is one of the biggest things that we have to tackle. We are tending to pick up the sites that have a regeneration aspect to them, and we are in the process of making a bid for Homes England to support us with subsidy in this process. So that's sort of to do with the viability, but I think that we've got to take a reality check that every time we push our standards further, and I'm not sure we should, every time we want another green roof or another bit of this or another bit of that, that's a bit less of the 1,000 houses that we've got the money left over to deliver. So we've got to find it should be quality. It should have, good insulation characteristics. It should have renewable energy, air source heat pump type, wherever possible to do. But, when we push beyond that, bear in mind there's a consequence. There is an update report coming. I'm not sure if it's January or February to give a sort of an overall summary of our approach to these things. And as I say, we're on a trip to Homes England at the moment to say, you know, what's the Chancellor got in the piggy bank, and we need lots of it for Maidstone. You were talking about footfall and consequences of you know, other authorities. I think a lot of that went a long time ago. You know, in that first major round of staffing reductions, which is probably nearer to 10 years ago than 4 years ago. But the trend continues, and this is exactly what our high street is facing, and that's why we need, you know, the strategies that we're working on, and the realization of the reality that goes with it. Very cognizant of all of that, but you're right, there's an element of that there. But other businesses following you know, less people work in an office, less people come into Maidstone to work in an office. It has a proportional reduction effect upon the amount of that's being spent. But we will continue to make whatever the town centre is the best and the most appealing and the best value for money and the easiest to access that we can. So there's just a couple of responses to some of what you said, and I don't know if Mark wants to add a little more.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. And on the PIs, I'll in a minute I'll bring in Kylie Benville, who I think is online, to comment on those questions. But on the questions about the capital programme, it's always frustrating with capital programmes. They tend to slip, and as you pointed out on Maidstone East and Heather House, that has been the case. But those projects are absolutely going full steam ahead. Maidstone East we're shortly going to be looking for planning permission. Heather House contractors have been appointed. You raised the question about the Housing Investment Fund. At the beginning of this financial year, as you say, there was 3.2 million in the fund. Council voted to put a further 3.5 million in February, and it has been the practice that the council has used one-off funding from central government to top that up. So that decision remains to be made by council at its meeting in February. But if there were one-off funding coming through as part of the forthcoming local government finance settlement, that would give the opportunity to put still more money in. So we are building up the nest egg, which you rightly say is needed if we're going to set up an HRA. Can I hand over?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to. I welcome what the leader was saying in terms of the 1,000 affordable homes. I know we've had discussions at the leaders' forum recently about the need to be practical or pragmatic, rather, probably the best way to put it, in terms of making sure that we do deliver it. And not that there's probably, I don't know if there's anyone here from the planning committee, but I'd just urge people on planning to be pragmatic when we're bringing proposals forward, because you know the critical thing is to get these homes built. And if we end up, if Maidstone East, as a director was just saying, is shortly going to planning, one hopes that we don't suddenly find a situation where the council defers making a decision because perhaps the proposals aren't coming out as, I'm trying to think of the words, you know, perhaps with as leading edge perhaps of the development as it could be. But what we do need is something which provides homes for people. I know last night you were talking about housing, about the issue of asylum seekers, but the more important issue is the fact that we need to provide 1,000 affordable homes, as everybody here is committed to, and we just need to urge, and I'd urge all the other, everybody here to talk to their colleagues to make sure that we don't ask for additions to a basic proposal. As long as we provide quality buildings which are fit for purpose and will do the job and give people housing which will be good quality housing in 20, 30 years time. The idea of, you know, suddenly saying on top of that, we want, I don't know, I was going to say back bricks is one thing that comes to mind, green roofs and so on, which makes them unaffordable, because then we don't serve anything. We just have these sites sitting as brown fields, no housing built there, and us having to find the 780,000 overspend suddenly shoots up to £1.5–2 million overspend. So, the leader knows I fully support his actions he's taking in terms of trying to get the our colleagues on planning to be sufficiently pragmatic.
Just thank Councillor Harper for what he's saying there, because it is the truth. But I don't think everybody's listening. There are those that are publishing strategies currently that seek to reduce those numbers, change those plans, put in further cost and make further delays. And look, it might read well, but is it serving residents best? Be wary of the false strategy.
Thank you. I believe we were going to ask Carly Boville to come in on the KPIs.
Thank you, Chairman.
you.
Apologies that I appear as a ghost in the chamber. I am working on the webcast, so I am here. And thank you, Councillor Harper, for the questions that you raised on the performance report. The suggestions of some of the reason why footfall may be declined due to office space could be one of the valid reasons. It's a very difficult indicator for the economic development officers to really fully understand exactly the factors. So when they give recommendations and suggestions, it's usually due to seasonality and trends that we recognise over the years. Some of those lost office spaces where people are working at home could be an impact of that. And when we look to set the targets for next year, we will obviously be evaluating our trends as well as benchmarking against other nearest neighbours, statistically as well as geographically, which brings me down to this is a national trend that high streets and town centres have seen. Not many of them are making their targets in terms of footfall. At the moment, the topic of that would be down to cost of living, rise of inflation, people affording and deciding on their spending decisions. And then regarding the market hall, this is something that we are factoring into the KPIs that we're setting for 24-25, which will be coming in the new year, seasonal targets. So as you rightly pointed out, if we know that every August the market hall is going to be shut for 2 weeks because somebody is on holiday, then we absolutely should be adjusting our targets and reflecting that seasonality within that across all the KPIs. This is just a good one that highlights that point. So we take your point on board, and that is something that we are factoring in for next set of KPIs.
Thank you very much. I've got Councillor Cook next, please.
Thank you, Chairman. The two things I was going to principally mention have already been mentioned, so I won't go into those again, but that was the housing situation and Loch Meadow. I would just comment that in terms of the change in terms of the high streets and people working from home. As more people work from home, they're more inclined to shop online, and the shopping online, I think, has had the far greater impact on the high streets and shops that one walks into, rather than does it on a phone, and lo and behold, a van delivers it the following morning or sometime the next day between whatever time it is. Thank you, Amazon, and the likes. The one I do have an observation though, with all these people working from home and not travelling, why doesn't the traffic in Maidstone get any better? You'd kind of think it would do. As far as the overall and monitoring and looking at this, I think this is what Faye was getting to as well. I think we actually ought to say this is a job well done by the officers and the administration to have the type of figures that we have before us at a second quarter. Yes, there's a projected small overspend, but given the turbulence in the markets and everything that's been going on in the fairly recent past, the ongoing international situation, which has got worse with other things happening, I think to have a budget like this speaks volumes for the financial fiscal controls that currently manage this in this authority, and that needs to be recognised big time. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Cannon.
Thank you, Chairman. I wanted to focus on page 48, the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, and in particular the Rural Fund. I just wanted to, perhaps Mark may know, what's the success of the Rural Fund? Because obviously it says there's only two bids received this year, and previously 4 bids were funded previously, which doesn't sound like a huge number of bids. So I'm sort of wanting to know how many bids there were in total and how many were successfully funded, as part one question. And then the second sort of statement really is Tunbridge and Morling, Tunbridge Wells and Sevenoaks have a rural prosperity fund, and they are helping to fund businesses through grants. And so rural businesses are able to put in for a grant for a piece of capital equipment, a machine, or anything that can help them with climate change or help develop new products and encourage shopping locally. So lots of good ideas in neighbouring authorities. So I sort of want to know how well our approach is going, and then perhaps address the leader on the second point as to with the remaining £409,000 in future years, how we can perhaps make the scheme more successful and help local businesses in the rural economy. Thank you.
Thank you.
So you'll recollect that when we brought this to the committees, when we discussed this in our groups, this spending is profiled. So it starts off a smaller amount and then it rises. I've been looking at the bids. There are very strong bids there. There are bids that could singularly consume the whole lot in one go. So I don't think there's a shortage of appetite. Yes, other districts took different approaches with the money. As a blue-blooded Conservative, I rather subscribe to the pull yourself up by your own shoelaces principle of business rather than handouts. But, you know, we make the choices, and we did make that choice. Plenty of interest. Very confident that we'll get some superb outcomes for the communities that are taking the money up. We'll be reducing their community running costs forever with the renewable energy schemes that we've particularly sought. We showcase that technology. I hope people will see it in action, in practice, and think, do you know what? My confidence grows. I'll do a bit of that. It contributes to our climate change, biodiversity ambitions in a practical leadership manner. I think we're doing well.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know whether the specific question about how many bids came in and then how many were successful. Does anybody know that?
Funnily enough, I haven't got that information immediately in my back pocket. We could get it for you if you wish. I seem to remember it was something like a dozen or 15 bids, of which we selected 4 out. I think we suggested that some of the others needed to just do their homework a little bit better to get over the line next time. But as I say, we were ambitioning bids around 50,000. Decent schemes. You only need 10 of those to chew this money up. I'm, there were schemes more ambitious than that. I'm, very confident that the appetite is there and we're doing the right thing.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Thompson next, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I take note that consecutive items in the risk register from 58 over the next 3 pages scope from the right sorts of architects, expertise in appointing architects, the points on climate change and environmental damage on 59 and housing on page 60. I welcome Councillor Burton's comments earlier in response to my colleague Councillor Harper. However, I have to reject the characterisation that we heard earlier that we can either be pragmatic and realistic and maximise the 1,000 affordable homes to last for 20 to 30 years and pitch that against having environmental considerations as though they were some kind of add-on or afterthought. I refer back to this document. I think it is the right way to be going. I welcome the fact that Councillor Burton was one of a small number of councillors who was present in this chamber recently for the climate literacy, carbon literacy programme. We need, as a group, to become more carbon literate, to benchmark and scope out what the principle of ambition that Councillor Burton talks about actually looks like in achievable, technological, architecturally envisageable terms. There are indications in this document that show how those things could be envisaged. I would very much want to endorse the fact that it is and must be our priority to get homeless people off the street, to get people who aren't homeless but in unaffordable accommodation into affordable accommodation, and that needs to happen at pace, at speed, at scale, and that is an urgent possibility. I do not see any conflict with that and the longer term ambition for a 30-year housing programme that is environmentally sustainable, efficient and different, that we don't imagine that we're going to keep doing things the way we've done them in the past. You'll forgive me for recalling a speech which you very patiently listened to before I was elected, referring to that good boat, the Titanic, which was kitted out with 16 so-called waterproof, watertight compartments, turned out not to be watertight in the circumstances in which it faced. What was pragmatic and realistic on the design board turned out to be of no use whatsoever in the actual challenge. You know of the events in Abu Dhabi that this week, indeed over the last 24 hours, these are the pragmatic, realistic activities that we need to face. They must go hand in glove. So I welcome the leader's response, but I must give caution as to what it is that we are embracing as realistic and pragmatic, and say that we need to be more literate in terms of architecture and environmental sustainability than we have been up to now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Burton?
Yes, but I think we can put metrics to this and take out the aspect of it being an opinion-based guessing game of what's best. You know, carbon accounting. You know, I think we can actually look at, every pound we spend on housing, which addresses the need of our residents, how big a bang for our buck in the carbon agenda are we getting for that? It doesn't need to be, a green roof might be very good value in some instances, but it doesn't need to be, wouldn't a green roof be nice? As opposed to, well, actually, if we increase the insulation on everything, we're really making a difference. There's a science to this. It's not a guessing game. And I think that's how we should approach it. I think there's nods there. I think that's that we could all work on together.
Thank you, Councillor Burton. Are there any other comments? No. Okay, so I've got two separate parts here, so sorry. Right. Right. So the recommendation on the report here, if I take 1 and 6 together, because they're for noting, so is that agreed that as per the papers on items 1 to 6, the report is noted? Okay, and then on item 7, we've been asked to approve that the uncollectible business rates listed in Appendix 6 be approved for write-off by Cabinet. Is that agreed, members? Please do.
Sorry, Chairman. Whilst I support the report, but I've just got this nagging feeling about these write-offs. I think we just need to be more careful that we are alerting people to unpaid invoices sooner. Sometimes it does more harm than good to wait for the full 28 days or wait another month or whatever. And I'm sure that we are on a par with other districts, but we're better than, I was going to say we're better than other districts. And I think we ought to be hotter on this subject with a view to minimising the harm and minimising the likelihood of firms going to the wall. I think it's more helpful to businesses, whatever they do, to give them alerts as soon as possible. And I would question 28 days for certain. But I appreciate that's operational, but it's what I'm feeling in my bones. And I just feel I needed to say it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Is there any, or did you have any comments, Councillor?
Very simply, I'd say, look, we're all over this. These are the ones that have got to the end of the road. You know, they're liquidated, they're bankrupt companies, they don't exist anymore. We will have actively pursued every opportunity for recovery up to this point. Yeah, just be reassured, you know, I pay a lot of business rates. It's the most hated business tax that exists. They're very good at sending reminders. If you forget one, they're kind enough to remind you most promptly.
Thank you, Councillor Burton. So can we, as per the papers, approve item 7 on the list? Is that agreed with us? Sorry? Still approved. Excellent, thank you. So now we move on to item 11, the fees and charges for 2024 to 2025. And I call on Councillor Burton, the leader of the council, to introduce this report.
All part of the annual cycle. This fees and charges are reviewed every year. The report sets out what is proposed currently. You'll recall that the underlying budget assumption was, you know, looking at something to match sort of an inflation scenario of 5% in fees. Well, that's less than inflation, but that's been the working assumption in our budget proposals overall. Some are a little higher, some are a little lower. Some in some portfolios are frozen. But I think what you've got before you is a very comprehensive list. This is one of those lists, the closer you look at it, there's so many lines, you've been through it and I didn't spot that one. There's always something there to spot. I suspect that it's deliberate on the part of the officers sometimes to see whether we really do read it. But you know, so it's worthy of a bit of scrutiny. Your thoughts and your comments on whether this sits about right of what is proposed in relation to this portfolio are most welcome.
Thank you, Councillor Burton. Councillor Harper.
I think, yeah, I mean, it's a really, as you said, very comprehensive report. An important part of the budget that we achieve the income we set out at the September cycle or whenever it was when we started to look at the indicators. I've got a couple of questions, having looked at some of the detail in here. And they're not particularly in any priority order, it's more page order. And my first question, I suppose, is actually to do with page 76, where whilst it's not immediately under this committee, but it's under the third block down, second block down, sorry, it's the last one, it's where it's got the market, and it's showing that we are planning to generate an additional £5,500 or £5,580 of income. Whilst that's not a large amount in the scheme of things, I'm just conscious that I think when the budget was set for the current year, we reduced the income figure from what we'd had the year before, and that had been reduced from the year before that. So I'm just wondering, and I just perhaps urge the cabinet to double check the assumptions behind, albeit a small figure, but given the history of reporting the market not delivering in the past, I think it would just be worth a second check. And I notice again on page 110, just to show I did go through these figures, on Jubilee Square, I was surprised on the item events, educational promotion for charities and the public sector admin fee, that's been increased by 9%, whilst it might only be £5. That just struck me as, in terms of working with charities and other parts of the public sector, a 9% increase in the current circumstances seemed on the high side, as did on page 112 the cemetery and cremation charges, where when you look at it, got increases of 31%, 25%, 22%. In fact, actually, there's not so many on that page where it's anything in single figures. So some of those charges struck me as quite high, and I'm just thinking, with cost of living pressures on families when it comes to a very sensitive period of time, those seem quite high increases to me. And I understand we need to, over the whole council as a whole, we need to get this 5% increase. But then the last 2 points was just, I noticed on car parking, which is a large tranche of income, that we're suggesting to keep that at the current rate. And I know we're asked to read the budget report appendices where people are pointing out towards maintaining the sort of current service. But I say, given the amount of the value of car parking, a nil increase there means that other areas have to increase potentially quite significantly to keep us overall where we're wishing to be. And then just my final point is on page 121, which is, it's around houses of multiple occupancy, which everybody knows is a subject very close to my heart. And I was just wondering, probably not for tonight, but perhaps if the officers could just give me a few figures in terms of how many of these homes are licensed, so that one can understand the figures in a bit more context. But so those are my points on this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harper. Councillor Bradsworth.
On that last one, I think if the question is how many licence fees do we expect, it might be as simple as divide the budget number by the fee. How many don't pay that should is probably a more difficult question to answer. I'm going to let Mark go first on market, because let him give you some answers on that, and then afterwards I might say what I really think. But I will address the first set of charges. Death is a very competitive business. Now that sounds really brutal, but it is very competitive. Other councils operate facilities. It's closely benchmarked, so I don't think you'll find, and the team that we have running this are all over it. They know their stuff. They deliver a superb, compassionate service. So I please take some reassurance that they are carefully thought about. I don't think we're doing anything reckless there, but perhaps Mark will comment a little bit more on the market.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Although I'll give full answers to all your questions, Councillor Harper, of course, these proposals will have gone to the other packs. It's really only the corporate services packs proposals that formally you're looking at this evening, but happy to answer your questions. On the market, having steadily declined over years, appears to have stabilised in terms of its financial performance. So there is good grounds for assuming a modest increase in charges next year. So that's the reason for that. On page 110, you pointed out a 9% increase, but you'll also see that that's the effect of rounding. So in moving fees up, generally we try and get to a round number. So in this case, a £5 increase meant 9%, but it wasn't for any other reason than that, I don't think. I'd agree with what the leader has said about the crematorium and cemetery. The way the charges are set is quite careful. Where there's demand for particular items like headstones, then it's a commercial market and they'll set fees accordingly. But the basic minimum service for burials and cremations, they aim to keep those at a modest cost. So it's very much tailored to the particular line within the overall menu of services that they provide. Yeah, we can get the details about the HMOs for you separately. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Cannon next, and then I'll come to you, Councillor Gooch.
Thank you, Chairman. On page 119, there's fixed penalty charges in the discretionary column. There's failure to produce waste documents and failure to produce authority to transport waste. And there's also graffiti. As it's discretionary, I sort of feel these should be much higher. I mean, the first two, waste documents and transporting waste, £300. I mean, you know, if you don't have that documentation, to my mind, you may be fly tipping. So you should, if you can't produce it at any point, then you should have a much larger fine, potentially £1,000. And then graffiti, it's sort of £75. I mean, that should be a lot more as well, because in various points in the town and on the bridge, it's sort of when it's nice and controlled, that's fine. But there's very horrible tagging that goes on, and so I think the fee, as it's discretionary, should be much higher. So the first point is those two to help combat fly tipping, and the second is on graffiti. And then on page, where is it? Oh yeah, the HMOs that Councillor Harper mentioned. I noticed that some of the things there are discretionary as well. I think Councillor Harper and I, we've both done quite a lot in trying to combat HMOs in Fant and in Bridge. And so as there is discretionary charges here, I think those should also be a lot higher as well, so that we can say this council's doing something towards stopping HMOs in the town centre. Thanks.
I'll let Mark substantially answer this, but congratulations, Councillor Cannon. You have spotted one of those test questions that was put in there. You will recall that we've actually responded to changes in legislation with fly tipping fines, and we've already taken decisions that maybe not reflected here. Mark, do you want to?
Yes, unfortunately, Councillor Cannon, the figures here don't reflect decisions made separately by the well, initially by HHE PAC and then by Cabinet back in September, where charges have gone up for some of the discretionary charges here, including graffiti. And we haven't corrected it in this report because these figures were simply for information, but these figures will be updated to reflect the increases that were agreed when the fees and charges finally go to Cabinet for approval.
Thank you.
So what do we know what they have gone up to all? Or?
I don't have the figures to hand, but I can send them to you.
For example, in the case of fly tipping, I think we introduced a sort of like a major and a minor, but the major is the maximum amount that law allows us to do.
That's great. Thank you. Councillor Gooch.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got to hand it to officers for trying to work out this battle and balance of where to put the increases. I did find it rather amusing on Appendix C, the findings on page 124 from the feedback from the budgetary survey, that the reduced service should be democratic and electoral services. And then lower down, there were comments about money being wasted and suggestions to reduce or get rid of the number of councillors. And I'm wondering how much notice we should take of this. Should we all walk away with our tails between our legs because we're doing a rotten job? I think it's difficult for residents to respond to some of these questions because they're not always in full, they don't have the full facts. And why should they? They don't understand that we've got to put up parking service, for example, because we need the income. They don't understand that we need to put council tax up. We only give them a broad brush details. And I wonder if they do realise that we will be reducing the number of councillors, maybe not by enough by the tone of some of these comments. Sorry, that was just a bit of frivolity for this evening. Actually, it's quite serious, but you know.
Thank you, Councillor Gooch. Are there, Councillor Cook?
I've long thought that the ideal number for a council is 1. Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any other comments on the fees? Right, okay, again, this is another one. We've got a number of different sort of bits. So we are being asked to note the contents, note the fees, and as per Appendix B, and again note the fees and charges in Appendix C to E. So I'll take those separately. Is it agreed that those be noted? Note 1, 3, and 4, because number 2 we're being asked to make a recommendation, so I'll deal with that one separately. Sorry. Oh, sorry. Well, I can move that from the chair. Is that seconded? I think, yeah. So is that agreed, members? Agreed. And then on item 2, we're being asked to recommend to the Cabinet that these be approved as detailed in Appendix A. I'll move that from the chair. Councillor Cook, second. Is that agreed, members? Excellent, thank you. So now that's everything. So I now declare this meeting closed, and thank you all for your time, and thank you, officers, for your help with this. Thank you very much.